All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. I don't want to keep anyone late. I don't think we're going to take the entire amount of time tonight. This is really an update. I know that a lot of people have heard bits and pieces. You may already have heard some of what we share tonight, and maybe some of what we share is going to be new to you, and that's the purpose of this. Hi, Bryn, welcome. I'm glad you could join us.
Thank you.
All right, so what we've got today is we're just going to be going over an overview of Openside, just in case there's some folks that are really new to it and are wondering what the heck Openside is about. We'll be talking about the high school materials, a little bit about the scope and sequence. You'll get to see what that looks like. Let's see, then we'll talk about the piloting project, and the very last thing will be some next steps. So if what you're hearing from me tonight sounds good and you want to say, yes, I've checked with all the people that are important to check with in my district, sign me up, then you will email your regional science coordinator and tell them, yes, send us the official link. And then we'll send you an application link for that. All right, but that'll be at the end when I share that piece. Let's go ahead and we'll start with just a brief overview of Openside to give folks an idea of where things came from, to better understand where they're going. All right, let's see here. So first of all, Openside represents or reflects a vision for K-12 science education that is in the framework for K-12 science education, which was the blueprint document for the next generation science standards. So Openside seeks to ensure that by the end of 12th grade, all students have some appreciation of the beauty and wonder of science, possess sufficient knowledge of science and engineering to engage in public discussions and related issues, are careful consumers of scientific technological information related to their everyday lives, are able to continue to learn about science outside of school, and have the skills to enter careers of their choice, including but unlimited to careers in STEM. Now, in terms of my region, I can't speak for all regions in the state. One of the reasons why I'm so excited about Openside has to do with the history of where we've been and hopefully where things are going. Up at the top, you'll see early, way back in 1997, we had those national science education standards. Those were researched for about 10 years before two really important documents came out, Taking Science to School and Nation's Report Card. Ready, Set, Science and Taking Science to School around 2007, 2008, which started figuring out what did we learn from those national science education standards that were used all over the place in research in things like STC and FOSS and in their development cycles. At the same time, around 2007 or 2008, we had these organizations starting to do work around in the country. There was Next Gen Storylines out of Northwestern University. Ambitious Science Teaching began its work with a different name out of UW around that same time. And Inquiry Hub at University of Colorado at Boulder started doing their work all around that same time when those books came out. And then fast forward a little bit to 2012, we're in the timeline at the bottom now. The framework was released in 2012. We engaged leaders and science teachers from around the state to try and make sense out of what did that vision mean. It was a refinement of those 1997 National Science Education Standards. And that refinement then got boiled down into the performance expectations that are present in the NGSS in 2013, which our state adopted completely outright with no changes whatsoever. In 2007, in around that time, 2013, we started working with districts trying to make sense of what do we do with this stuff, because the vision was pretty big. We were all beginning to get an idea of what it meant, but nobody had instructional materials for doing it. So what can we do? Well, we can learn more about these standards by looking in our existing materials. So we started doing that. We looked for evidence of the practices and the cross-cutting concepts and the DCIs and whatever we were currently using at the time. We started learning about the EQUIP rubric, looking for opportunities in our units to augment and sort of keeping our eyes open for what's out there on the horizon. And then in 2015, in my region and several other regions across the state, we had the opportunity to start learning from the Ambitious Science Teaching Group at UW through a math science partnership. We've supported teachers in doing that work. Many of them, at least from my region, are here tonight, and I'm really glad to see you all here. And then in 2018, we had this opportunity through Climb Time to engage some middle school teachers in our state in the middle school piloting project for Openside. And Openside kind of started with this perspective of here we were in 2017-ish. The standards had been adopted for about 4 years at that point, since 2013, and publishers weren't really doing a lot with those standards. They put some stickers on their old stuff, they broke things up into different kinds of units, but they weren't changing anything fundamental about the materials they were producing. So the Openside folks were very fortunate to have some funding from Gates Foundation, Hewlett, and a couple other organizations, and they got to work trying to create an exemplar scope and sequence curriculum to try and drive the industry forward. So I'm really excited about this because those standards are built on our vision for where things were going to go in 1997. Those standards were too broad. The new vision is a little narrower and also includes some context for that thing called inquiry. Because if I were to poll all of you about what inquiry was, I'd probably get more answers than there are people in this room. So we're trying to be really clear about what we mean by engaging students in inquiry in this modern era. So here we are in 2021. Those middle school materials at this point have all been through their initial development stages. They've all been field tested, and except for the last unit, which is being field tested right now. And then by next year, they should all be worked through with the revisions and completely available for anyone to access. And because these are all OERs, anyone can reach these materials free online. And Openside's goal is to, again, create a complete K through 12 scope and sequence. So now that they've finished middle school, they're going to move on to high school is their next area. And that is why you are all here today, to learn about that project. All right, any questions about that big timeline overview? Great. So that kind of got us to where we are right now. Openside, its goals are to ensure that any science teacher anywhere can access and download freely available, high quality, locally adaptable, full course materials. So we're not necessarily looking to find out who happens to develop a unit that I can fit into slot B in my year. They wanted to be able to give people that complete support because, again, the changes asked for instructionally in next generation science standards, if you're trying to do that in just one unit a year, the kids may not really get used to it. It needs to become a part of their normal way of doing things. And the best way to do that is to support teachers with materials to do it with. So what makes Openside unique? They're designed for the framework-based standards. In our state, that means the NGSS completely. In some other states, they chose subsets of the NGSS. They include transformative professional learning. And what that means is all of the PD materials for training people on these OER materials, well, those PD materials are also OER and are available freely online, right? And I gotta say, they're really, really good. They are open educational resources with support. So not only can you ring up or email the Openside people anytime you want to, but they're also maintaining Facebook groups for each of the units so that teachers who are trying these out can reach out to other practitioners at any time. And they're built upon consistent storylines and routines. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a bit. But those storylines and routines help kids know where they're going next, because the last thing we want to do in this era is have kids showing up to class and saying, what are we doing today? They should be part of the conversation of where we're going next. And so Openside definitely wants to support students in knowing where they are and where they're going. Openside had 10 partner states who have been involved in the piloting project so far. I don't know if they're opening it up to more states or not. Based on the numbers, I'm guessing that the states are the same. And they've really tried to have their materials tested in a wide variety of classrooms and with a diverse population of students. Washington State's own participation in the middle school project included 20 pilot teachers across our state. We estimate that we've impacted, I shouldn't say we, that our teachers have impacted well over 3,000 students at this point after 3 years of trying things out with students. And they've also reported that some of those teachers who have moved grade levels have reported that their students coming into 8th grade, if they'd had them as 7th graders, they knew what to do already in terms of engaging with the materials and the class routines. So that was really cool to hear. All right, so I'm gonna let you read this on your own. This is Openside's vision for those high quality materials. The one that I want to highlight here is the second one down, that second bullet, and that speaks to what I was saying earlier, that students know where they are and where they're going and why. So we want the unit to be coherent from their perspective, which means we engage them from the very beginning in navigating how this unit is going to be unfolding. Now, that doesn't mean that we're catering it constantly and making it different all the time to what the students are telling us, but it's structured in such a way that it involves students in that navigation from part A to part B. All right, what I'm sharing with you here is a map of the Openside storyline instructional model. All of their units are based on a similar structure. On the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see that they all begin with some kind of anchoring phenomenon, something that captures the student's attention. All of the phenomena have been selected with student input to find out which ones are the most meaningful or the most engaging for students. Based on that phenomenon, students then will develop questions based on their interests and their background knowledge. Those questions are used to help navigate from, now we've asked the questions, where do we need to go next? What do we need to find out? They'll do investigations to collect data. There's part of our inquiry piece, but what's different about this is we use the results of that inquiry to inform our original questions about the phenomenon, the thing that we saw happening. And so this iterates throughout the unit. Right? So all of our units have very similar structures, and like I said, the teachers have shared that students really come to anticipate and know how to use these and engage in them more fully with their classes. So in the high school world, now that middle school is almost all done being developed, we're moving into the high school realm, or Openside is moving into the high school realm. What they did is they're still working with BSCS and Next Gen Storylines and the Dana Center at University of Texas, Austin. So that group is still involved to help sort of bootstrap and launch at a faster speed what they're doing at the high school. They found some already very similar materials developed at University of Colorado Boulder by Bill Penwell's group, which are called iHub or Inquiry Hub. And a lot of people have tried those out over the years. So they're using those units as a way to fast forward in developing the units for the high school scope and sequence. So we have development that started in January of 2021, taking those Inquiry Hub units and starting to translate them into an Openside framework. What they've decided to do is to do what's called a modified domains model. So that means they are developing a biology class, a chemistry class, and a physics class. It's completely accurate and appropriate to call them those. So if changing the name of the class is something that's very difficult in your setting, you don't need to worry about that. However, each of those classes has really strong integration with Earth and space science all the way through it. So the traditional biology class, and especially the traditional chemistry classes that we knew in the past, are going to be in the past. And this is really looking for a tremendous amount of integration, even though we're recognizing this is definitely a chemistry class. The number one goal is for these things to be useful for kids to explain the world around them. So rather than learning about the chemistry they'll need in the future, they're learning about the chemistry they'll need to understand the world that they're in right now and the problems that they're facing. We're looking at those units probably being available for people late in 2022, because we're starting piloting here late in 2021 in the fall. And then the full program should be done by 2024. So they've got just a 2-year development time frame, and then the very last part of that leading up to 2024 is getting things in published form. And we've got Brandy joining us. Brandy, welcome.
Hi.
All
Hello.
right. Hey, so Brandy, I was just sharing, we had just transitioned from big picture of Openside into the high school specific things. And so I'm showing the timeline, and I'm about to show folks the scope and sequence. So you're just in time. All right. big reveal. We've never shown this to anybody before, except last week's meeting like this. Are you ready? Boom. So again, we have 3 courses: biology, chemistry, and physics. All right, and we're going to take a little more, or a little closer look into some of these. The next one I'm going to share with you is going to be the biology scope and sequence, or at least the draft. So what you'll see on the left-hand side is they have connections from the Openside middle school units. One thing that I've been incredibly impressed by in these middle school units, I have not seen this in any other curriculum at the middle school level. Not only do the units build coherently upon each other, so unit 2 builds on unit 1, right? Lessons build on each other as well, and even years build on each other. So in the middle school, the modeling the kids use in the 6th grade units around particulate nature of matter comes back, and they use it again in the 7th grade units on chemistry. And so their engagement in the practices is scaffolded over time for students to become stronger and better at demonstrating their ability to engage in those practices. And here we see that they have the same intention at high school, plus they're building on top of what kids already knew how to do in the middle schools, which is exciting. Now it is an OER, so there's no need to use this and teach it in the exact order given, except that as part of the piloting project, you would be teaching the units verbatim, so with extreme fidelity, because again, we're seeing how well do these units work in different classrooms and with different students. All right, so there's the high school one. Those of you who are going to have probably taken screenshots already. So I can go ahead and move on to the chemistry scope and sequence. So far what you've seen is you've seen 5 units in the biology year. There are 5 units in the chemistry year proposed. And then the physics year that I'm going to share next is a little different. This one has 6 units in it. So 5 units in one, 5 units in the other, 6 units in the physics one, and a 2-year development cycle. You may be wondering, wow, how are we going to do all that in 2 years' time? It's a lot, but the Openside folks have learned a lot by working with our middle school teachers. The next slide. All right. So their proposed development schedule is in next school year. They'll field test 3 units in the biology course, 2 units in chemistry, and 2 units in physics. And then in the following year, they would field test 2 more units in biology, 3 in chemistry, and then 4 in physics. So it's a pretty ambitious piloting project. We're really fortunate so far. We've had a lot of interest from people in biology and chemistry. We've had less interest from people that identify as physics teachers. And so if any of you have colleagues who are physics teachers and think, hey, they might be a good candidate to be a pilot, throw this information their way, or throw their name to your regional science coordinator, and we'll get in touch with them and see if maybe we can recruit a few more physics teachers to be part of this. All right, the proposed professional learning schedule. So in summer of 2021, this would probably be happening during the last week in June, because all of the states involved have money from their legislatures to do work this year. And the way legislative money works, of course, is it all has to be spent by June 30th or you lose it. So we're looking at probably late June training, like the last 4 work days in June, but they haven't set dates yet. So that's just what we're anticipating. So that would be biology. You get 4 days of training. Each day would be 4 hours long of training. So 16 hours total for each of these units. And then fall of 2021, they're identifying this unit to start with. They haven't identified, meaning this is the one that you'd be trained in next. And they haven't done that for these ones, so they'll take some time. Then in winter of 2022, You'd be trained in the natural selection unit in bio and be able to train that. For these ones, nuclear processes and radiation. Then the following summer, here's what you'd be trained in. Here's what would be piloted. So again, it's a really ambitious timeline, but the training is, I'll say, really good. And it gives people a really good chance to use these materials with their students and be supported in doing so. So for high school field test participants, field test teachers, what we're going to be doing is we can recruit up to 20 Washington State field test teachers for each course. So 60 altogether, 20 bio, 20 chemistry, 20 physics. Within the state, Openside is going to identify one teacher called a focal field test teacher. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means. And up to 10 additional focal teachers and their students are experiencing these units and learning with them. Now, we're hopefully recruiting up to about 60 teachers. That's about 11 teachers right there. And that doesn't mean that nobody else's input is important. They're just going to be done through less formal surveys and input into the Openside group. So some expectations that we hope are going to work well for folks that would like to be part of the field testing. We ask that field test teachers attend all the days of professional development for the field test units. Again, that's about 16 hours for each of the units. But they field test the Openside units with fidelity. And then in year 2, and here's the hard part for larger districts especially, in year 2, we're asking that field test teachers teach the entire year scope and sequence. So that way they can see how well the students do at the end of that year, having had all the things happening in the beginning of the year. So they can see student outcomes from a year's worth of participation. Please, we ask that people participate in any state collaboration requirements, that you provide feedback to Openside during and after field testing each of the units using an open-ended teacher feedback form. And then there's an optional piece here that interested field test teachers may be invited to contribute additional data, and those are the ones I had shared earlier about. For the focal field test, if you happen to be that person, provide feedback to Openside using a variety of data collection instruments, including the following. And our middle school pilot teachers did a lot of this. So they're really changing the model from as many as we have in our state to just one in each state. There are end of unit surveys, sharing student work samples for each unit, administering one student exit ticket per unit to the students, administering pre and post assessments to students, and then administering end of course surveys. And from the district level, what we would ask districts to be able to provide their pilot teachers is supporting the teachers in the field test so that they're using those materials with fidelity, meaning that they're going to need that time in their year to be able to teach that unit. It may not take the whole year, but let's say that you have one teacher in a biology setting and there's lots of different biology teachers in their school. This person might need permission to teach at a different pace because they're matching what Openside is doing for that unit, rather than trying to squeeze the Openside unit by cutting pieces out into whatever the normal biology scope and sequence is for that district. If your teacher is a focal teacher, then we would ask that you review and approve the research application. And if your teacher is a focal teacher, we'd ask that you work with the project researchers to provide access and permission for observations and classroom data collection associated with the field tests. And lastly, is ensure that students can complete surveys and assessments online. Again, just making sure that there's electronic resources available for students to be able to do that. All right, the demographics we're looking for ideal field test teacher is that it's someone that works with student populations that reflect the student demographics of Washington State with respect to race, socioeconomic status, language, and disability status. Right? This could be teachers that are Black, Indigenous, people of color. It doesn't have to be, but we're trying to intentionally recruit, again, as wide a variety of teachers and participating students as we can, and has experience teaching non-dominant groups and communities. The ideal candidate would have a deep knowledge of NGSS, be innovative and open to trying new things, collaborative and willing to share, able to commit. They'd have district support. And if that person happens to have connections within your district to somebody who's taught middle school of these units, the pilots, that's really helpful, because Openside asks people to do things in ways that are quite different than what traditional curricula asks students to do. And so having other people nearby to ask questions of and sort of say, hey, am I doing this right, is helpful. What's in it for you, the teacher? Access to resources. There will be stipends and sub reimbursements. So if you're missing school days, sub reimbursements, and if you're doing things on like after school, outside of your contract time, or on weekends, there will be some stipends for that. You'll have a network of like-minded teachers. And what we learned in the middle school group is they didn't all start like-minded, but what happened over these 3 years was pretty amazing to see the changes and the expectations of some of the teachers. And a large part of that had to do with the fact that they knew each other, they saw each other several times a year, they could check in with each other anytime. Professional growth leading to teacher leadership, and then cutting edge of science education. These are both OER and there's Earth and Space Science integration. All right, so the next step is this. If you are interested in being a field test teacher, you want to be sure that you've procured support from your building principal and anyone else in your district that you might need clearance from. What we found in talking with people is oftentimes it's not a requirement. It seems easier for people in small districts to be able to make those arrangements, because when you're in a large district with, let's say, many high schools and biology at each school, there's a lot of pressure to maintain equity by having each of those classes be very similar to each other. But that doesn't mean that if you're in a large district that you can't be part of the pilot. It's just something to make sure you've checked with the right people, you know that you have their support to be able to do this. If you've done that and you're still gung-ho, you want to do it, email your regional science coordinator. Let me put a link for you in the chat box. And that link will take you to OSPI's listing of all the regional science coordinators. In case you don't know who yours is, email them and let them know that you are interested to find out more information. And what your science coordinator will do then is they'll send you a link, like the golden ticket link to the official application survey. Right. But one thing that we really want to do is we want to make sure that if people are actually applying, they've checked in with all those people that they need to, because in typical fashion, I'm learning at ESDs and state and nationally, all the field test teachers need to be identified by April 15th. It's not far off. So the sooner we can get names in, the better, because that lets us take all kinds of resources that we need to and redirect them towards this project. Now, one thing that I want to make sure that I let everyone here know is we intend on using, like we did for middle school, our climb time funds to help us do this. And I mentioned that earlier. Right now, we don't know if we have those climb time funds next year. So what that means is we're recruiting right now with this really tight deadline, and yet we don't know if we're going to have the funding to support it going into next year. So what I would encourage you to do is, if you're pretty sure this is something that you'd like to do, go through that application process, get your names in there in the official list, and just in the back of your mind be thinking, okay, there's a possibility the legislature may not give the money to move forward with this. But we will let people know as soon as we can. As soon as we know that, we'll let them know how we can move forward. And that is the whole update. So if there are any questions, I will hang out here. If anyone has questions, I'm happy to try and answer them, or at least sound like I'm trying while I can't answer it if it's something specific enough. And otherwise, if you've got what you need already, you are free to go. I want to thank you all very much for joining us this evening. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Brian, I have a logistical question. This is very exciting. Thinking about the 4-hour trainings that would be part of the getting ready to field test. Would
Mhm.
those be, and I saw the, sub reimbursement. So would those all be during their teaching day expected to do sub priors? Just worrying about some of the impacts on substitutes right now for our systems.
Yeah, great question, Bryn. When I saw a recommended timeline, what they were wanting to do is they were wanting to train our state facilitators. What I didn't mention is we're going to be hiring 9 state facilitators. They'll probably be trained the week before the teachers are. And so we're looking at after school year ends time. Yeah, so we're thinking like the very, very last week in June.
Then though, as we prepare for that fall or winter, it seemed like there would be a 4-hour before each of those. Would some of these possibly result in the need for sub priors?
In the past, they have.
I would just encourage us to think creatively as much as possible. I hope we get back to a place where that's a reality, but I know many districts right now that's very much would be kind of a deal breaker.
Yeah. What we've done before in the past is we've tried to reduce impact by doing something where we'll do a Friday beginning to it, and then we'll finish up the training on a Saturday and a Sunday. And so we've done that before. That was when it was in person. Everything has been Zoom based so far this year. So what we did for some of the other ones this year is we did the training from 12:30 to 4:30 p.m. So people only needed a half day sometimes. And yeah, but thank you. Very good point.
Hi, Brian. This is Emily. Question about the training as well. I have to go to grad school in Montana the last week of June through the first part of July. And I don't know if that precludes me from being able to participate if I can't make training because I'm not around.
Yeah, that would be my guess, but I am the messenger and I'm not any kind of decision maker for this. So I think it would be a great question to pass along to Ellen Ebert from OSPI. And if you wanted to send that question to me, I would be happy to forward that to Ellen. My guess is that it probably would preclude participation.
Brian, I had a question about the rollout. So if maybe you can go back to those slides and help me to understand, because it looked like there was 4 units that they wanted to, or no, 5 units that wanted to roll out for biology, but I was having a hard time looking at the biology scope and sequence to actually see separate units. Yeah, so that one looks like there was 5.
Mm-hmm.
But then go back one more because it.
There we go.
Yeah, so are each of those boxes units?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, so our first unit is ecosystems and interactions, and then matter and energy, structure and function, natural selection, and then common ancestry.
So I count 12 units then, and they want to roll out 5 next year. Is that what I'm understanding correctly?
In biology?
You said each of the boxes is a unit. So like there's 3.
Sorry, each rectangle with a blue bar.
Oh,
that's the unit.
Got it. So there's,
right.
I understand.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so I did a terrible job narrating this. I apologize. So the first column here is showing which of the performance expectations are integrated that are not Earth and space science, because they're showing all the Earth and space science in column 2 to show where the integration is. And then the third column is showing where all of the engineering and technological design standards are fitting in.
Okay.
Thank you for asking me to go over that.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
And Jamie, I apologize. You've had your hand up for a while.
No worries. I thought the logistical questions would be good to get out of the way first. My question has to do with student impact during the pilot years, and that's based on individuals who ran the 8th grade pilot. I'm just wondering how students manage moving into a system or a scope of study using Openside type units and then coming back out of those, if that makes sense. So in what I've seen from the Openside, they're pretty different than traditional units. And if we're doing 2 or 3 units a year, rolling those out, how have the students managed kind of moving back and forth between those style of units?
You know, that's a really good question. I wish that I had anecdotal evidence to be able to share with you that readily addressed it directly, and I don't, and I wish that I did. One thing that I can say is that one of our middle school pilot teachers has shared, because her teaching situation changed during the last trimester worth of time because of COVID-19 and shifts between at home and at school learning and all that stuff. What she has shared is that her students, some of them really struggled because when they went back to in-person, they were suddenly with a very traditional teacher with notes and lecture-based science. And so some of her students really struggled. However, she also shared some of her students really liked it. The students that usually want the A's and the GPA type stuff, right? Even in middle school, they're tuned into how grades work on report cards. They liked transitioning back into what they were used to ahead of time. So what I take away from that is that students definitely notice a difference. On the Openside website, you can find a lot of sort of student, in their own words, students describing what they like about this way of engaging in the learning that's different. But I don't know that they really attended much to trying to capture that from the students on when they're transitioning in and out of it.
So a follow-up question to that would be, I'm kind of going into this assuming that will be at least hybrid. Has the curriculum been designed to kind of address the needs of a hybrid situation in addition to an in-person situation?
That's a really good question. I know that the units as originally designed were not intentionally designed to be done in a remote setting at all. Some of our pilot teachers have struggled with that because things take longer in a hybrid setting because they see their students fewer hours a day, at least in one version of hybrid. And so they've struggled with things taking longer. And so anytime things take longer, you start dealing more with students that become less engaged over time with something. But at least that attempt is still there because of the architecture behind how the units are designed. So there's still that primary attempt to try and keep students tied into the focal phenomenon.
Brian, can I ask a question about, I know you mentioned it makes sense to, stay true to the curriculum, you're doing the whole thing. I'm just wondering if there is flexibility around, like in my district, I teach a large number of multi-language learners, bilingual students, and we have, with our new language guidelines from the state, we've got everyone sorted into 5 categories, each with their own level of support. Like those kinds of support, can we build that stuff in, or for IEPs, and like how true is true?
That's a great question, Rebecca, that I would love to pass on to Ellen. If you wouldn't mind, could you email me that and I will happily forward it. I think it's a great question.
Thanks.
It seems like there would have built in some differentiation options in it anyway. Like I'm thinking about my special ed students, there would,
yes,
yeah. So there might and probably should be some ELL differentiation as well, I would assume.
So one of the central design tools used as they develop these is universal design for learning. But universal design for learning may not be as specific as state level requirements are. So yes, you're right. There is some attention paid. I just don't know, hearing Rebecca's description, if it would be sufficient to already consider that. My guess is, Rebecca, but it's a guess. So I still want to ask your question. Please send it to me. My guess is that they would want you to attempt the interventions that are built into it because it's a pilot and they want to know if those things work.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that typically I would assume that it was, and there's just, we've been given 5 different plans for 5 different groups of our English language learners that are really specific now. So we're building like way more specific than they used to be. And I just want to make sure that I would, I'd be able to meet that.
Yeah, for sure.
And do you know, are the lessons designed to be in like a 45-minute or hour period or block, or can they be flexed? Does it give like those guidelines?
It does. They don't give them to us yet because right now everything's in draft form. I haven't seen that. I think the middle school ones are designed around a 50-minute time frame. And so when it comes to the actual lesson breakdown, yes, it's very much like this. Here's this lesson, it'll take this many days, and here's how many minutes you have in the first day and the second day. Yeah.
I'm wondering, Brian, if we got teams excited about this and we go through this process, you know, our teacher's going to feel a real loss if there isn't like a formal district-wide adoption and these folks go and field test and then they're the only one, you know. I know we've done work in the past with the middle school, but I'm just trying to think about, you know, what would that carryover look like for a district our size to really sustain this? And, you know,
Yeah, that's a great question. You know what I can say, and I don't know that it answers your question, but I think it's related to it, is so it is very much a pilot. It's a research project. Whether or not the materials for high school are good enough for your district to even consider adopting, we won't know until after piloting. So I think coming into it from that perspective and with clear communication might help other people that may not be involved. But then also what we saw happen with the middle school units was everything is OER and it's available online. So what our middle school teachers were doing, our pilot teachers, is they were talking to their teaching buddy next door saying, hey, here's what I'm doing, and I'm just going to send you the PDF because you might as well do this too. And I think that, I mean, Openside certainly does not discourage that, and I kind of feel like it's part of their buzz marketing strategy to get more people to try things out.
So Brian, just to make sure I understood that. So if we're a team of 5, we could have one if we made it or whatever, we could potentially have one person do this and then the other 4 could still also do it, just not be a part of the formal organization.
Right, yeah. And then whatever materials. So for instance, if you had one pilot teacher, we would provide your site with one teacher's set of materials. But like I said, we anticipate, well, first of all the reading materials and the teacher's guides are available free online also. It's just that a lot of people like to have printed copies of those materials. And like I said, what they're thinking they're going to hear is that a lot of high school teachers have access to these materials in their stock rooms anyway. So just like with the middle school version, there was very, very little specialized material. They tried to use stuff that was readily available no matter the community because they didn't want people to have to call up a special service to order the thing they needed to do the unit.
I can't speak from a ton of experience, but I'm just going to jump in from a teacher's view. I have had the opportunity to assess using the EQUIP rubric, some of the middle school programs that Openside has put out. And I think the biggest reveal for me is that it is a huge pedagogical shift along with content shift. Really high quality material, lots of thought being put into it, not just from how the students are approaching it, but how do teachers approach the curriculum. Super excited about it being available for high school teachers. And I would imagine on the ideal situation, systems like what Rebecca is mentioning, where one teacher is piloting and several other teachers are working alongside in the same group, running the curriculum, that I think would be an ideal.
Oh, and Jamie, thank you, because that reminded me, one of our pilot teachers in Cedar Woolley what our middle school pilot teachers were asked to do was to select a single class period that they were going to use it with. And then they were free to use the materials with their other class periods. And so this gentleman did it verbatim for that one period, the way it was written, but then for his other classes, he tweaked it because he wasn't reporting data on them. And so that, I don't know for this one if they're going to ask the pilot teachers to teach all their all their sections that way, but I think that would be difficult because a lot of the high school teachers that I know don't teach just one thing in the day.
This seems like a tremendous opportunity. I'm going to throw one more worry at you, Brian, and he's worked with me, so he knows I do this to him. I love the June dates. I get the spending by June 30th. I am worried about our credit retrieval programs that often are taking place at that time, and just some of our really, teachers that might be wonderful this work would also be limited. So any way we could get creative about not being a deal breaker. I get that the most should be there, but if there's any, I guess if you've got a great cohort and you don't need to, but if you need to consider some type of expanded model, I can think of a few folks that usually are teaching that credit retrieval that probably couldn't do both.
Mm-hmm. That's really good feedback, Bryn. Thank you.
Brian, could teachers be signing up already and we might not be aware at the district level? Is there a current list that we should be getting a sense of?
The only list that I have so far, okay, there are two lists. The first one is the one that I sent you the link to before, Bryn, and you already filled it out, and that was just gather interest. Where is their interest? The other list is a list that science coordinators have been adding specific names to. Some of them are in this room and they may not realize it, but by the way, you're on a list. And and no one from Marysville is on that list yet. One of the things that really made my ears perk up and pay attention to Openside, I mean, as a regional science coordinator, my job is to remain agnostic about specific instructional materials, right? And I am certainly not for Openside. And the two reasons are, first of all, it's an OER. So this isn't, I mean, Openside isn't making money off of this or using it. And our state legislature has specifically sanctioned OERs for districts to make use of. So we don't have any qualms helping people find this one and even support training and implementation of it. And then the other thing is that when I started seeing the names that were attached to this, so if you run in NGSS circles, okay, Next Gen Storylines is Brian Reiser out of Northwestern University. He's attached to this project. Bill Penwell out of University of Colorado Boulder, he's attached to this project. At an early stage, Phil Bell out of UW was an advisor, and so was Mark Winchittle at an early stage. When they were doing the middle school things. So I look at this and really it's kind of like the way I kind of describe it is it's almost like the NGSS Brain Trust kind of decided to say, hey, we're gonna upset the market.
So Brian, since you've been involved with ambitious science teaching and Pastel Castle, I mean, are you feeling like that's what these units look like? Is that what this is?
Yeah, so in fact, I mean, absolutely, yes. I think that if you were to take ambitious science teaching and turn it into a formalized, officially scope and sequenced and implementation calendared type thing, you would end up with something that looks like this. It has all the things in it that I would have hoped to have seen from an ambitious science teaching perspective. Sometimes they're called different things, or they might do it in a different way, but they're still asking students to do the same kinds of things. So that's one thing that's a big plus. The other thing that we found out from our pilot teachers is up in my region, where we have a lot of people that have been introduced to ambitious science teaching, when they started piloting, I mean, that's who we recruited to do the piloting. They had no trouble with it. It's like they were excited to see it. But from other regions of the state where they had no ambitious science teaching preparation ahead of time, they spent the first unit or two of Openside doing that thing that all of us do, right? They were struggling with it and they were kind of fighting against it. until they saw their students doing these same things that got us excited in in ambitious science teaching. And then they were like, oh, wow, this is what I want to keep doing. So yeah, if people have AST training, I think they'll recognize a lot inside these units.
Thanks for that endorsement, and I appreciate you making that connection, because that really helps me feel more confidence in going into saying yes to something that I really, I don't have a middle school group here that I've worked with, so I don't know what that looks like. So thank you, appreciate that.
But you know what? Also, another thing is, like, if you have colleagues that also are, or yourself, and you're wondering how much like AST does this look like, the Inquiry Hub materials, those are also OER, and like I said, that's the seed they're starting with for this biology curriculum. You could go and take a look at those, and I think with those, it was still really clear to a lot of people, oh gosh, yeah, here's the phenomenon, and here's how we get the kids' ideas out, and here's where we do some modeling. You'll see some differences, like for instance, in the early Openside units, their version of modeling was a blank sheet of paper, which from AST were like, hello, students could use a little more support. And guess what? Over the 3 years, they've introduced various model scaffolds into the curriculum as they've learned more about it as well.
I'll just add another endorsement for the Inquiry Hub materials. If you want to get a sense, we have biology teachers at our high school using those and have been for a couple of years now, and they have a lot of similarities to the Openside. So if you want to see an example, all of those are open resource. A lot of the documents are in Google.
And some of them were just really easy name changes, like a lesson bend in Next Gen Storylines is called lesson set in Openside. So, but the structure, you look at it and you're like, aren't I looking at the same thing?
And did they release so for each unit, is it wrapped around a phenomenon? Is that, and do they release like what the phenomenon is before you sign up, or you have to wait?
Yeah, they haven't released that, so okay. We don't know. Like for the biology one, my guess is that you're probably going to see a lot of the phenomena that are used in the Inquiry Hub materials repeated, but I don't know that. That's really just me guessing. All right. Well, thank you all. It is 4:32. I don't want you to feel like we have to stay in case there's another question, but I want you to feel free to ask questions. You can send your questions to me. You can send your questions to any of the regional science coordinators across the state, and they'll probably send them to me or some of my other colleagues that are tied to this a little more closely, and we can get those answered for you. I'm sure you'll probably come up with some. And I hope you'll have a great evening again. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Brian.